The kitchen clock had not struck 5, but I was already sitting at the table with my hat in my hands, turning the brim slow. The lamp was low, the stove still held warmth from the night before. My wife had not come down yet. The children were still sleeping upstairs, and the whole house had that quiet sound a house makes before the work of the day begins. I heard one board creak above me, and I remember thinking that by sundown, every person under that roof might look at me different. That was the morning after my bishop told me what I had to do as a husband. I did it. I believed I had to. And even now, years later, I still feel shame when I think about the way my hand shook before I opened my own front door. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband and father, and I speak from the life I know, not from a book and not from what outsiders imagine. I share these stories because there are things about leading a household that do not show from the road when you pass a farm and see only horses wash on the line and children in plain clothes. Some things happen behind a closed door, where a man must decide whether he is obeying God or protecting his pride. If this story brings a question to your mind, leave it below, because I do read them, and this one is not easy for me to tell. It was in late November, 11 years ago now, when the cold had settled into the barn boards and the ground had gone hard enough that every step sounded sharp. We had 4 children then. The youngest still fell asleep in the rocking chair after supper. The older 2 boys were beginning to be useful in the barn, though more willing than steady. My wife, Miriam, was carrying a tiredness I did not understand then. I saw it, but I did not understand it. That is hard for a man to admit. I saw it. I saw her hands moving slower over the bread dough. I saw the way she stood still for a moment before lifting a basket of wet clothes. I saw how she would turn her face away when one of the children asked for something small, not because she was angry, but because she had no strength left to answer gently. I saw all of that, and in my mind I made it into something useful for myself. I told myself she was having a hard season. I told myself all women had hard seasons. I told myself my work was outside and hers was inside, and that if I did my part, the house should somehow hold itself together. There was more to it than work. There always is. That autumn, I had taken on more orders than I should have in my shop. I was doing cabinet work for 2 families and repairing a wagon for a neighbor. I was leaving before the children were awake and coming in after dark with sawdust in my beard and linseed oil in my coat. I thought that made me faithful. I thought providing was a man's duty. There is truth in that, but half a truth can become a hiding place. Miriam had asked me twice to speak with our oldest boy. He was 12 then, long-legged, restless, and full of the kind of pride that looks almost like confidence until it wounds somebody. He had been sharp with his mother, not loud in the way an English boy might be loud, not defiant like slamming a door, but sharp enough, slow to obey, quick with a look, careless with words, the kind of thing a father should see because it grows if he lets it. The first time she told me, I said I would handle it after chores. I forgot. The second time she spoke lower. That should have told me something. A woman who has to lower her voice in her own kitchen is often closer to breaking than a woman who raises it. But I was washing my hands in the basin, thinking of a joint that had not seated right in a cabinet door, and I said, "He is a boy. Do not make too much of it." I can still see her face when I said that. She did not cry, she did not argue. She just looked at me in a way that made the room feel suddenly empty. Then she turned back to the stove. 2 days later, after Sunday meeting, the bishop asked me to stay a moment. He did not make a scene of it. Our people do not need many words to make a thing heavy. He put his hand on my shoulder as the others gathered coats and bonnets and said, "Jonas, walk with me a little." We walked past the wash house toward the edge of the lane, where the fence posts leaned from years of frost. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. I remember mud frozen in the wagon tracks and a yellow leaf caught in the grass, trembling though there was almost no wind. For a while he spoke of ordinary things, the hay that had come in late, a family with sickness, a young man who needed steady work. I answered as a man answers when he knows the real matter has not yet been named. Then he stopped by the fence and looked toward my place, though you could not see it from there. He said, "Your wife came to speak with my wife." I felt heat come up under my collar even in that cold. Not anger first, shame first, then anger, because anger is easier for a man to carry than shame. I said, "About what?" He looked at me, not hard. That was worse. A hard look gives you something to push against. A gentle look leaves you alone with yourself. He said, "About being tired in her own house, about your son speaking to her in a way that should have been corrected by his father, about feeling that when she brings a trouble to you, you set it back in her lap." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say I was working, that I had done nothing wrong, that my wife should not have taken our trouble outside our door. But the bishop waited until I swallowed those words, and then he said the line I have never forgotten. "Before you correct the boy, Jonas, you will ask forgiveness from his mother." I looked down at the fence rail. There was a split in the wood, dark with old rain. I remember that more clearly than some birthdays of my children. I said, "You want me to ask my wife forgiveness in front of him?" The bishop said, "Not in front of him, first to her. Then you will tell your son that a house is not led by ignoring the woman who keeps it standing." That was the order, plain as a nail. It was not punishment in the way some might think. He did not shame me before the church or speak my name in meeting, but he placed a task on me that felt heavier than carrying a beam. He told me to go home and humble myself where I most wanted to appear strong. All that afternoon I worked badly. I cut one board half an inch short and misplaced the same chisel 3 times. I answered the boys with fewer words than usual, and they knew enough not to ask why. Pride makes a man quiet in a different way than sorrow does. When evening came, Miriam put supper on the table: potatoes, carrots, a little beef gravy, bread from the morning. The children ate with the hunger of children who have carried wood in cold weather. I barely tasted it. I watched my oldest boy reach for the bread before his mother had sat down, and I saw Miriam pause for the smallest part of a second. Before, I might have missed it. That night, I saw it like a lantern in a dark room. After supper, I told the children to wash and go upstairs. They were surprised because there were still small chores usually done before bed. My oldest looked at me, trying to read my face. I told him again, not sharply, but in the tone a father uses when there will be no third telling. When they were gone, Miriam began clearing the table. I stood up to help, then stopped, because I knew if I began doing something with my hands, I could hide inside the work. She looked at me and said, "Are you unwell?" That question nearly broke me, not because it was tender in a soft way, but because even then, after I had failed to hear her, she was asking after me. I said, "Miriam, sit with me." She did, slowly. She folded her hands on the table. There was flour in a fine line along one finger. Her eyes were tired. I had seen tired eyes on men after threshing, and on my own father near the end of a hard year. But it is different when you finally see it on the woman beside you and understand that you helped put it there. I told her the bishop had spoken to me. Her face changed then, not fear, more like someone waiting to see whether a door would open or close. I wanted to explain the orders, the work, the money owed, the pressure of being responsible. I wanted to build a wall out of reasons. Instead, I heard the bishop's words again, and I knew reasons would not do what repentance had to do. So I said, "I did not listen to you. I made your burden heavier. I let our son think your word could be weighed less than mine. I was wrong. Will you forgive me?" That was all. No long speech. My voice was not pretty. It came out low and rough, like it had dragged through gravel first. Miriam looked down at her hands. For a moment I thought she would say yes quickly, because that is what a good wife is expected to say. But she did not. She sat in the silence. I am grateful now that she did. Forgiveness given too quickly can sometimes spare the guilty man from feeling the weight of what he did. At last she said, "I can forgive you, but I need you to hear me sooner next time." That was the one line. Quiet, not dramatic. It has stayed with me longer than any scolding would have. The next morning before chores, I called my oldest boy to the kitchen. The others were still upstairs. Miriam was by the stove, and I asked her to stay. I wanted my son to see her as part of the authority of that room, because she had always been part of it. He came in with his suspenders twisted and his hair still rough from sleep. He thought he was in trouble for something he had done, and he was, but not first. I told him, "Your mother came to me with a concern, and I did not handle it rightly. That was my failure. But your speech to her has been wrong, and it stops now. In this house you will honor your mother not because I am watching, but because God sees when I am not." His face went red. Mine probably did too. It is a strange thing to correct a son after confessing your own fault. A man might think it weakens him. It does not. It removes the false strength, and what remains is cleaner. I had him apologize to Miriam. Not with mumbled words thrown at the floor. I made him say what he was sorry for. Then I sent him to the barn with me, and we worked side by side for nearly 2 hours without much speaking. Near the end, while we were laying fresh straw, he asked if the bishop was angry with me. I said no, but he was right with me. That can feel worse. The boy nodded. I do not know what he understood that day. A 12-year-old understands more than he says, and less than a father hopes. But something changed after that. Not all at once. Boys do not become men in one kitchen conversation, and husbands do not become better husbands by saying one apology. There were still sharp mornings, tired evenings, and times when I failed again. But a line had been set. For my son, the line was that his mother was not beneath him because she spoke gently. For me, the line was that providing for a family is not the same as leading one. A man can fill the cellar, stack the wood, pay the debts, and still leave his wife lonely inside the work of the home. He can be respected by neighbors and careless at his own table. That is a bitter truth, but useful if a man does not spit it out too quickly. The shame I feel now is not the same as it was then. At first it burned hot. I was ashamed that my bishop had to tell me something I should have known, that my wife had needed to speak elsewhere, and that my son had learned a wrong lesson under my roof while I was busy calling myself faithful. Now the shame is quieter. It comes when I see a young husband answer his wife too quickly, or when I hear a boy speak over his mother and watch the father laugh it away. It comes when Miriam carries something heavy and I feel the old thought rise up, the one that says, I am tired too. Then I remember the kitchen clock before 5, my hat in my hands, and the bishop's order waiting on me like a harness I did not want to wear. I still believe in the order of the home. I believe a husband carries responsibility that cannot be handed away. But authority without humility becomes only weight on someone else's shoulders. A wife is not honored by words said in front of others if she is ignored in the quiet room where she asks for help. Children learn what a father believes by watching what he permits. That is what I understand now. The bishop ordered me to do something simple. Ask forgiveness. Correct my son. Set the house back in order. But simple does not mean easy. Sometimes the hardest command is not to build more, earn more, work longer, or stand stronger. Sometimes the hardest command is to sit at your own table, look at the woman who has trusted you with her life, and admit that you made her carry more than her share. If you are a husband listening to this, I will not tell you how to rule your house. A man who has failed has no business speaking like he has never been corrected. But I will say this. If your wife has been telling you the same thing more than once, listen before another man has to tell you. If your children dishonor her in small ways, do not wait until those ways become the shape of their character. And if you have used your work as proof that you are doing enough, ask whether the people inside your house feel led or only provided for. There is a difference. If this story stayed with you, you are welcome to subscribe and hear more from the life I know, told plainly as I can tell it. And I would like to ask you this. What is one thing a husband or father should notice sooner in his own home? Leave your thought below. Many men, myself included, could learn from an honest answer.